Report 2024-2025.
Honourable Member for Mersey.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise today to take note of the Voluntary Assisted Dying Commission's annual report for 2024-2025. Mr President, I would also like to acknowledge the President of Dying with Dignity Tasmania, Dr Bert Shugg, who is here with us today in the chamber. It is the third annual report, and I would like also acknowledge the Minister responsible for the Voluntary Assisted Dying, so welcome. It is the third annual report since the End of Life Choices Voluntary Assisted Dying Act 2021 came into being, and one that foreshadows the statutory review of the operation, scope and potential scope of the Act that's due to be completed by the end of the year. Mr President, I believe it is important that the work of the Tasmanian Voluntary Assisted Dying Commission is recognised in this place to continue to spread the word and raise the profile of a legitimate medical option. It is noteworthy that we now have three very well credentialed professionals as members of the review panel. Professor Emerita Kate Warner AC is a member of the expert review panel. Professor Warner was the Governor who signed the original Act into being, witnessed at Government House by the President, Office of Parliamentary Counsel Senior Drafter Robin Webb, and by yours truly. Another member of the panel is Professor Ben White, Queensland University of Technology. Professor White has a keen understanding of the law relating to voluntary assisted dying, VAD, how it operates and how it is regulated in numerous jurisdictions, both here and abroad. He is an invaluable source of information and learned analysis for all Australian VAD acts and regulations. The final panel member is Tasmanian Professor Michael Ashby, who brings his expertise in palliative care to the panel's deliberations. Mr President, a very competent and knowledgeable panel. I'm certain that the panel will take an entirely compassionate and holistic view in their deliberations. I look forward to their report and any recommendations that may come from it. Mr President, it should be noted that I've been advised that more information regarding the review should be available soon and the submission timeline. It's also notable, Mr President, that many people in this chamber, my honourable colleagues, staff or visitors, would probably know of a member of their community, family or friends who may have experienced directly or indirectly in some capacity voluntary assisted dying legislation. Mr President, the Commission's report show that VAD has become a well-established and trusted part of the Tasmanian Health Services. Demand has increased significantly, with first requests rising by 71% compared to the previous year, and voluntary assisted dying deaths increasing by 73%. This is not to be unexpected, Mr President, and this percentage increase also has occurred in all jurisdictions where VAD has been recently introduced. These figures show that Tasmanians who are suffering intolerably at the end of their life are increasingly aware of and able to access and choose how their suffering can come to an end under this Act. Mr President, the report also records overwhelmingly positive feedback from families and loved ones. One son commented, "For Mum, the ability to choose when and how to end her own life and to be able to do so in a dignified and calm manner was fundamental to who she was. I have some tears in my eyes as I am writing this, but they're not tears of sadness, they are tears of gratitude." A quote from the partner recounted how their loved one died in a happy frame of mind as she'd wanted to go into her own home. They also commented, "I want to say that we were met with kindness, caring and understanding at all times from the doctors, the navigators, the nurses and others who attended to us over the last 6 months of their loved one's life. We wish to thank them all." These reflections remind us that voluntary assisted dying is not just a clinical and administrative process. It's a deeply human act of dignity, agency and genuine care for the needs of the patient. Mr President, voluntary assisted dying in Tasmania relies on the dedication and professionalism of medical practitioners, pharmacists and nurses who have completed the state's specialised training. In 2024-2025, 65 practitioners undertook training, with 32 completing it. This included 10 medical practitioners and 16 registered nurses, many of whom are now serving as primary medical practitioners, consulting medical practitioners or administering health practitioners. The annual report highlights that practitioners describe this work as among the most rewarding of their careers. Indeed, Mr. President, their willingness to accept the substantial extra administrative work and emotional burdens of the process is a testament to their commitment to patient choice and compassionate care. The Commission rightly acknowledges their contribution, noting that without their involvement, voluntary assisted dying could not be delivered safely or with the necessary compassion. Mr. President, another positive outcome in the report is the reduction in process duration. The median time between a first request and a final request fell from 18 days to 12 days. In urgent cases, second and final requests were made within 48 hours, ensuring that where possible, those at risk of losing decision-making capacity could still exercise their rights. The Commission and its staff responded as quickly as they were able, often considering matters outside the usual meeting cycle to meet practitioner and patient needs. The legislation is so written to allow flexibility in assessment and for the process to proceed expeditiously. The Commission also notes that the voluntary assisted dying deaths now account for 2.1% of all deaths in Tasmania, up from 1.2% in 2023-2024. Mr. President, it possibly reflects the growing awareness of VAD, increased involvement by some dedicated health practitioners, and the reality that many more Tasmanians are finding comfort in knowing they can exercise control over their final days if they are suffering intolerably from a terminal illness. For many, simply knowing that they are eligible for a VAD process is enough to ease suffering, even if they ultimately choose not to make a final request. It is interesting to note that 26% of participants died without using the substance. It could suggest that the legislation gives an assurance that there is a means of ending suffering if it gets too hard to bear, as it offers an alternative option that's still within a patient's control. This comfort in eligibility, Mr. President, also assists the individual with their quality of life whilst coping with the issues associated with a terminal illness. However, within the 26% of truncated VAD processes acknowledged in the report, there may be patients who lost decision-making capacity before being able to make a final request. The report expressed the Commission's concern. Quote, "The Commission is nevertheless concerned about those participants who have wished to access VAD substance but who have ultimately not done so because they have died or lost decision-making capacity before they could complete the process. The point is well made, and no doubt the review panel can look more deeply into what might be termed the truncated 26% identified in the report. Decision-making capacity and prognosis time to death are two facets of VAD which will no doubt receive comment throughout the review panel process. Mr. President, whilst the report acknowledges what is working well, it also identifies ongoing challenges and sets out recommendations for the future, which is a good sign in a report. Chief among these is the growing workload on medical practitioners as the demand for VAD assessments increases. Regions such as the Tasman Peninsula and West Coast remain somewhat underserved, relying heavily on a small number of practitioners. The Commission urges greater recruitment and training of general practitioners statewide so that access is not determined by geography. Going hand in hand with the increasing demand for VAD in our community are concerns about the administrative burden placed on practitioners and their capacity to support VAD assessments. Medical practitioners have indicated that complex documentation and usability of approximately 18 separate PDF forms is a major challenge and issue, some parts of which are a huge bone of contention as they are complex and repetitive and could well inhibit participation in VAD services from some medical practitioners. It is imperative that the Commission decrease administrative duplication to provide support for the doctors to be involved. Whilst the Commission, and rightly so, defends the robustness of these processes, noting that they are essential to safeguard voluntariness and prevent misuse, it is a case where enhanced and duplicative legalese overrides practicalities of medical recording and information gathering. Nonetheless, the report recognised the need to streamline systems and reduce unnecessary barriers and has recommended the establishment of a VAD data management system to improve efficiency. A recommendation that now may be a moot point, given a recent government decision realising that a portal system is used in every other VAD legislation has obvious efficiencies. Mr President, I would like to acknowledge the advocacy of the Honourable Leader and the Honourable Minister for Health, which I have been in regular contact with. When I raised the issue last year about the vital need for an online portal as an essential update to streamline the necessary administrative processes and data management, the Leader took the initiative to raise it immediately with the Minister for Health during one of our breaks. The Honourable Leader returned to us with news that the government had committed to establish a VAD administrative portal. It's something that practitioners have been asking for since the Act first came into being, and I thank them for their taking decisive action that will make a real difference. The decision was also confirmed in estimates when the Minister was asked the question by Committee Chair, the Honourable Ruth Forrest, MLC. The annual report made additional recommendations, many of which reiterate recommendations from previous reports. Firstly, the problem with the 2005 amendments to the Commonwealth Criminal Act 1995 that prohibited the use of carriage services to access and transmit suicide-related material. The stated intent of the amendment at the time was to target pro-suicide websites, internet chat rooms and online cyberbullying. However, since then, VAD has since become an established legal right in all states and the ACT. Opponents of VAD, despite most legislation stating that VAD is not suicide, have conflated the issue to prevent the use of telehealth for any part of the VAD process. A restriction that in many cases adds to the suffering of people during a VAD process as it creates further delay and makes the essential role of practitioners more difficult. Fortunately, as there is a requirement in the Tasmanian legislation that the first meeting is in person with the doctor, this does to some degree mitigate the telehealth suicidal concern. In 2024, Kate Chaney, MP from WA, did introduce the Criminal Code Amendment, Telecommunications Offences for Suicide-Related Material, exception for Lawful Voluntary Assisted Dying Bill, as a private member's bill in the Federal Parliament. It made to the second reading stage and was sadly removed from the notice paper at the end of the 47th Parliament. Mr President, perhaps honourable members from all sides can encourage their federal counterparts to reintroduce and fully support Kate Chaney's bill. As whilst it has a long title, it was a relatively simple amendment that would make all the difference in every jurisdiction. I am also aware that it's an agenda item taking place at the national ministerial level. Mr President, the other recommendations relate to practical support for medical practitioners, their remuneration and the lack of MBS item numbers for VAD services. Whilst there is a degree of remuneration and practical support for medical practitioners and pharmacists, it relies on a great deal of goodwill and almost volunteer input from them to serve the needs of people seeking VAD. Adding to the problem is the fact that many of the practitioners choosing to support eligible Tasmanians seeking VAD are senior practitioners approaching retirement. There is the worthy suggestion that the registration, insurance and CPD costs of semi-retired practitioners that choose to support VAD processes could be reviewed. It would allow a dignified transition into retirement whilst contributing their clinical expertise to support essential roles in the VAD process. Mr President, the report speaks to the values of our Tasmanian community. Voluntary assisted dying is about respecting the dignity of people suffering from a terminal illness, giving agency, a sense of autonomy over something that is otherwise beyond their control. The report shows that our system is working effectively with compassion and integrity. The coming review will allow an objective evaluation of the Act, its function and operation. I have every confidence that the members of the review panel are ideally placed to give a fair appraisal of VAD services in Tasmania. The review of the legislation is also an opportune time for the Commission to revisit its processes and practices so that the VAD pathway for Tasmanians truly reflect the intent and parameters of the legislation. Mr President, in conclusion, the Voluntary Assisted Dying Commission's annual report for 2025 records the growing trust of Tasmanians in the system, the dedication and kindness of practitioners and the compassionate support to families in incredibly difficult times. I commend the Commission, its staff and all practitioners involved in VAD for their tireless work and compassionate support. And I ask honourable members to take note of the report to acknowledge its positive outcomes and reflect on its findings as we enter the period of review. I also acknowledge and thank those Tasmanians and families who have contacted me to say thank you to all members of Parliament who supported and continue to support the VAD option in our state. Mr President, before closing, in recent times I've been involved in forwarding submissions to and presenting speeches in several countries, assisting where I can with their VAD journey. I obviously try and keep a handle on the progress in each country. Interestingly, I recently listened to the Right Honourable the Lord Falconer of Thornton, Charles Leslie Falconer, who sets a powerful tone on the assisted dying bill for the House of Lords, sitting on the 27th of February 2026, when he said, and I quote, "I'm the person who's been complaining about filibustering on the radio. I moved a motion on the 8th of January, this is in 2026, in which I set out in detail my position about the delays that have been made. I have complied completely and continue to comply completely with the courtesies of the House during the course of the debate. But that does not mean that I do not think the position is that we are taking an undue length of time in relation to it." Then he says, "May I give the House the statistics? We have spent 53 hours debating this bill at committee stage. If we included the additional scrutiny by a select committee and the 2 full days of debate at second reading, we have had more than 80 hours of deliberation on this bill since it was passed to us in June, more than 8 months ago. 1,253 amendments have been tabled in total, of which we have debated 354 so far. We have had over 850 amendments left to be debated, which would suggest we need another 22 days of committee stage if we continue at this glacial pace. After 9 days of debate, we have completed consideration of just 3 clauses. We have debated 26 groups and have another 60 still to go. I completely endorse what my noble friend, the Chief Whip, has said, that we've got to be kind and we've got to be courteous. I would earnestly ask the House to consider whether or not we could agree informally how we could make progress and complete the committee stage by the end of the next day, because otherwise we fail to do what we're good at, which is scrutiny and improvement. The way it is going at the moment, we will reach no conclusions whatsoever. We will appear to be an irrelevant talking shop," unquote. It should also be acknowledged in this country, individuals and groups comprising the VAD fraternity are incredibly supportive, and one only hopes that the Northern Territory, as the only Australian jurisdiction without a VAD Act, are able to achieve that goal in the not too distant future. I can remember during the Tasmanian journey that there were some tough times or tough moments. I tend to forget those now, Mr President, but the wonderful support and encouragement received from organisations such as Dying with Dignity Tasmania, Go Gentle, Doctors for VAD, Nurses for VAD and Christians for Voluntary Assisted Dying cannot be underestimated. My international connections with Dignitas based in Switzerland and inspirational individuals in the Netherlands, Belgium, Canada and the United States were also an important sounding board and a source of strength and advice. Mr President, I'm also pleased that in this place the Tasmanian End of Life Choices, or the Voluntary Assisted Dying Act, received unanimous support. Mr President, worldwide, Tasmania is the only jurisdiction to have a Chamber of Parliament unanimously endorse an act such as this. Mr President, I'm so grateful that we, in this place, have had that debate, scrutinised, improved and reached a conclusion, and now all eligible Tasmanians have the choice. Once again, I congratulate the Minister, the VAD Commission, health practitioners, pharmacists and the clinical services and VAD navigation teams for their outstanding and compassionate efforts. I do hope Tasmanians from all walks of life choose to be involved with the review and forward their submission to the panel when it's released. As we know, submissions of all sizes for inquiries from individuals and community groups do really help inform panel members about circumstances of concern, influencing possible recommendations. Mr President, I move to take note of the report.
Question is the report be noted. The Honourable Leader.